Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Lyudmila Sholokhova, curator of the Dorot Jewish collection at the New York Public Library. We'll be discussing the discovery of what is now called the David and Ina Shiff WEVD music collection, a treasure trove of Jewish and Yiddish music that was recently found and donated to the library, that contains thousands of musical works and is a testament to the vibrancy of Jewish life in America. But before we dive into today's conversation, a quick reminder: if you enjoy this program, subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. The New York Public Library, NYPL, recently acquired a hidden treasure trove of Jewish sheet music and orchestral arrangements from the long-defunct radio station WEVD. Locked away in the basement of cantor David Schiff's home for decades, these 3,000-plus pieces, ranging from cantorial music, Hasidic melodies, Yiddish theater classics, klezmer tunes, and even opera renditions, capture decades of American musical expression. Now safely housed in the New York Public Library's Dorot Jewish division, this extraordinary archive gives us a window into a cultural community that has bridged generations through song. We're honored to be speaking today with someone instrumental in recognizing the importance of this discovery, Dr. Lyudmila Sholokhova, a musicologist and curator of the Dorot Jewish division. Dr. Sholokhova has described WEVD as, quote, a history of Jewish music and the Jewish people in the United States. And her enthusiasm for the newly acquired collection speaks volumes. In our interview today, we'll explore how these forgotten musical manuscripts were thankfully rescued and what they tell us about Yiddish radio, Jewish theater, and the continuity and vitality of Jewish culture in America. Dr. Sholokhova is curator of the Dorot Jewish collection at the New York Public Library. She previously worked at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research as director of the YIVO Library and Archives, and as associate director for external relations in Eastern Europe and Russia. From 1994 to 2001, she was a research associate at the Judaica division of the Vernadsky National Library of Ukraine in Kyiv, where she is from. She's also author of numerous publications in the history of Jewish music and Jewish bibliography. Dr. Sholokhova, thank you for joining me today to celebrate the library's acquisition of a priceless piece of American Jewish culture. This is exciting news, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you very much for your interest in this collection and in our library in general.
Well, before we get started, and I've got a lot of questions because this is such a rich treasure trove, tell us about yourself and how you entered the field that you're in.
Well, it's a great question. Actually, I entered the field by chance. I am a trained musicologist, but my original interest was in French music. When I began working for the Vernadsky National Library of Ukraine, and it was in early 1990s, when all the hidden archives and collections were suddenly opened up to the public, I was there, and I was very lucky to actually to be at the beginning of the discovery of the famous Ansky collection and Beregovsky collection, another collection that was thought to be lost and was out of public access for many, many years. And I was just there. And it was something that really determined my path in life. And I started learning Yiddish, actually from the manuscripts themselves, with a teacher, with a self-taught book. This is how everything started. And then I defended my dissertation. I changed the topic of my dissertation, and my dissertation was about the history and of Jewish music folklore studies in the Russian Empire before 1917. And I continued this path. And when I came to the United States, I was lucky enough to get a job at the YIVO Institute, where I was also exposed to very rich collections of the Institute. And I also very happy that I played a very important role in the Vilna collection digitization project. And that's kind of another like chapter in my life. So there are by now 3 chapters: Kiev, Vernadsky Library and collections of Ansky and Beregovsky, then YIVO Institute and Vilna collections. And at New York Public Library, when I started in 2020, during the pandemic, I was really thrilled to discover wealth of Jewish materials, which are much broader than anything else I had to do in my previous life, in my previous steps of my career. And so that was another journey. But then one really critical point was discovery of the WEVD collection, which was also hidden. So this is second collection, musical collection, that I was lucky to work with.
Let me stop you there for a second before we continue. Well, clearly your career path has put you in the right place at the right time. For listeners not familiar with the story, explain something about WEVD. It has a rich history as a Yiddish-speaking station, but not only a Yiddish-speaking station, because I remember its line used to be when they would give an air check or a station break, they would say the station that speaks your language, because they had other ethnic language programs. And I remember listening to WEVD when I would visit with my aunt and uncle in Brooklyn when I was a teenager. Tell us about the station and its large devotion to Jewish music.
Well, that's a great question. I just must say that I'm not American by origin. I came to the United States in 2001, and my first exposure to the Yiddish radio station began when I was at YIVO. And at the YIVO Sound Archives, we had some recordings from the WEVD. And then I also heard, of course, about the Yiddish radio project, and it was mostly all about recordings. And so basically, I learned about this radio station through the music, but it is a known fact that the WEVD radio was established in 1926, and at first it was a voice of the American Socialist Party, and in 1932 the radio station was taken over by the forwards, and this also changed completely the concept of the radio station. So it began serve the interests of the Yiddish-speaking audience more than it was much more than it was before, and in such a way that actually on one side to continue this connection with the community from their place in Eastern Europe, but on the other hand, just really to help them to adapt to the American ground. And there was a very rich Yiddish programming, but as you mentioned, the station also spoke other languages and, of course, English. And that basically continues, this tradition continued, but towards the 1960s, 1970s, more English was again really was heard on the radio. But the music remains a major connection. The music, the intimacy of Yiddish music and the arrangements maintain this level, that maintains this balance.
So tell us about why the New York Public Library would have an interest in this radio station and the music that it played. Tell us a little about the Dorot Jewish division and its collections and how it would come to be interested in this particular subject.
First of all, any collection that enters New York Public Library, the curator need apply for the acquisition. That's a really process. It's a process, and when you suggest collection for acquisition, even if it's a donation, and something large like that, you really need to prove your point. So when I learned about this collection from Hanko Snetsky, and when we went to see this collection, I wasn't particularly sure what I'm going to see, and I wasn't even sure that we want this collection. But when I first entered the basement, I heard from Hankos and I saw some preliminary inventories. When I started browsing through the boxes, I got so excited. I have really this natural feeling. This is something that belongs to New York City. This is something that belongs to New York Public Library, because the New York Public Library, for its over 125 years, was a place, was actually served as the Jewish brains of New York City. So everybody was coming here, and we have everything about New York and Yiddish in New York and Jewish life in New York. In addition to a very broad profile of the Jewish collections in general, but we have everything. So I took many pictures, and I came back, and very excited, and Hankos and another colleague of mine, we went together, so it was no-brainer. We just knew we were going to get it. And then I applied, and everybody agreed this is something that we need to get, because it's a Yiddish New York, and it belongs to New York Public Library.
How did Cantor David Shiff acquire all of these materials?
Well, this story is very well told by Hanko Snetsky, and he spoke about that at our program, public program on November 13. So the story goes like that Hanko Snetsky participated, was one of the interviewers for the oral history conducted by the Yiddish Book Center. And at some point, he was asked to interview David Shiff, because David Shiff was a personality, musical personality, a cantor and a singer who was on the radio for over 30 years. So this is how Hankos met David Shiff, and it was again during the pandemic. And there were two interviews, and Hankos tells the story himself. And by the end of the second interview, David just said, "By the way, maybe you can help me with something." And he told him about the collection in his basement. And then he told them that when the WEVD radio station was downsizing, and it was in 1980s, it was just really real estate question. So they didn't really have space to keep all these boxes. Everybody was taking something home. And but in small part, but most of the collection was still there, and nobody needed it. And then David Shiff asked the director of the radio station if he can take all the boxes home. And he said, yes, of course. So basically, he took all these boxes to his home at Yonkers, and he took care of the collection since then, and his children first helped him to relocate the collection. His daughter organized the collection, and even compiled a preliminary inventory of the collection, which was extremely helpful. And but at some point, well, they really needed a place. They were looking for a place for this collection.
You know, it's interesting. You know, you hear stories about this from time to time, that there are these great treasure troves that were sitting in one place, and somebody fortuitously appeared on the scene to take it or to save it, actually. So that story that you've just told falls into that category. So let's go back to WEVD. He's got the collection, but let's look at what kind of music was WEVD featuring during its heyday. Was it mainly Jewish? Was it specifically Yiddish? Did other genres appear? What was on their playlist?
Many things. It was, of course, music of the Yiddish theater in New York. Then it was like something that we call classical Jewish music, music created by Jewish composers in the beginning of the 20th century. Composers that were trying to establish a national Jewish school, Jewish music school, and then instrumental music, Then liturgical music, well, cantorial compositions, but also a lot of music by non-Jewish composers in Yiddish translation. With some favorite composers, like really a lot, for example. But obviously, they performed a lot of music by Tchaikovsky, for example, or by Italian opera composers such as Puccini or Verdi. They really love this music, so it's basically everything. It's very broad, and it reflects a variety of interest, tastes of Jewish community in New York City, and also attempt to educate them. Also, a lot of music about Israel, because this collection was shaping during as the 20th century was passing by and going through all these steps, all the stages of the 20th century. The music collection shaped itself. There were musical about Holocaust, after Holocaust, establishment of the State of Israel, American life, all these things. It's
you could say that basically, even though this was the music in the collection of a radio station, that it reflected the musical interests of the Jewish community writ large, across the country. And
exactly.
Which composers, because you mentioned a few, you mentioned non-Jewish composers, which composers were frequently associated with WEVD? Did they compose classical works, popular tunes, a mix of genres, tunes from the Yiddish stage, like from Goldfaden or Joseph Rumshinsky?
Yes.
What was the repertoire?
The repertoire, Jewish composers, first of all, the four greatest composers of Yiddish theaters was Alexander Reshanetsky, Sholem Sekunda, Rumshinsky, and Elstein. So these four. And especially Sekunda really created a lot of arrangements. And what we see, the arrangements are not signed, but I think the earliest arrangements from 1930s were done by him, Sholem Sekunda. So there are many other composers, maybe less known, choral composers such as Gilbert. Many, really, there was a lot of choral music on the radio. And I must also say that Slavsky, many names, many immigrants, names that are now forgotten, Yasha Kreitzberg, for example. The names that nobody even remembers. And as I said, there are music scores, but there are also manuscripts, even score manuscripts of the compositions that never were published, and they were specifically created for the WEVD radio station. For example, some music compositions by Shanetsky or Pinchas Yesinovsky. That's also a very interesting thing. And I must say that from the very beginning, the collection was very well organized into the categories, so to enable easily find piece for the specific format of the program. So there were songs were all had a stamp with the character S, and then numerical numbers, and there were duos with D. Everything with these, and there were a lot of choral music with character C, and orchestra pieces, for example, had O. So it really was easy. And then on the folders, the music was kept on the folders, the score, and then musical arrangements. But the folders themselves are also very important because they contain information, not a complete information, but from 1960s with the dates of broadcasting and with people who performed these pieces on the radio. And sometimes, and also time code. How long was this piece to enable to structure the program? So there is a lot of information. There's regular folders that they can, and so we're going to keep them, put them into another folder.
So you had actual radio logs of the when the program was broadcast and how long each piece was.
Not
let me
not a complete, not just really from, I don't know for what reason, only from 1960s.
So let me ask you, even in the 1960s still, but earlier for sure, radio stations everywhere, oftentimes they'd have a studio situation where live musical performances were made from the station itself. Was that at WEVD, that kind of mix of recorded music and live programming, or?
It was live programming. That was, no, it was only live programming. The musicians were physically present at the radio station. The whole orchestra, sometimes up to 16 people, and also musicians themselves. And very frequently, very beautifully dressed, even they were not seen. What they were not seen on the radio, but it was a real concert. So.
Well, this is really a feature of radio, I think, that today people can't appreciate. I worked in a small radio station in New Hampshire, and usually on weekends, and there was a studio. I remember there was a small polka orchestra that would actually buy time, and they would have music program. There was a country and western band that did the same out of the studio, and the sound from the studio is different than hearing a record, a recording disc. Clearly, if you say that there were orchestras of 16 people and others who were in the studio, then that really must have been quite something. So
yeah, let
me ask you now.
I just wanted to add, yes, it was, I think in the high days, there were 16 musicians and also singers. But then towards the 1960s, 1970s, they were already downsizing. There were like 5 musicians,
Sure.
6 musicians, then only a pianist and maybe another instrumentalist. So we were downsizing. And I like your point about recording in the studio versus recorded music. And this is something that Henry Saposnik during the program pointed out, that recordings that survive don't really represent how this music really sounded. This is why the music score and orchestra arrangements are so very important, because they help to reconstruct how it really sounded in the studio, like which is much richer and much complete representation of the musical piece versus what people have heard on the radio, and especially what is preserved now, the quality of the sound.
So it's all a treasure trove, but was there something in what you found in those boxes? Was there something that jumped out at you, something that surprised you?
I think I was surprised by really the whole volume of the collection. I was also surprised at even visually, because it's not only music, it's also visualization, like the music scores themselves, how they look like, the faces of the musicians, or design of the scores, everything together. So when I was going through, I was looking, first of all, I wanted to understand what is in the collection, at least the names of the composers, and at least how to orient myself in this collection. Then also, I was looking for visually interesting materials, because we need to present it to the public and make it interesting. And then I was, of course, looking for the details. For example, some handwritten translation, Yiddish translations, or head letters of the WEVD radio station, and the dates, and this and that. We need to make what was the story of the collection. So I really can't say. But for me, well, I'm a classically trained musicologist. Was a discovery to find so many Yiddish translation of really iconic opera arias. On the other hand, it was interesting to find unpublished pieces. And when I was doing this slideshow for the program, I was actually focusing on the pieces and checking them here and there, that this is music score that was not published anywhere. It exists only here. and by well-known composers such as Rumshinsky, Olshenetsky, or even Yasinovsky. So I can't really point out to some particular piece. I was taken by the whole picture. And I think there are more discoveries ahead.
Well, that brings me to this question. What does the library, the Dorot collection, and the library intend now to do with this in terms of programs?
Excellent question. So right now we are actively discussing future steps, how to process this collection. And it's not necessarily because we have a performing arts library that has other collections. So we're kind of discussing how we're going to share courtesy of this collection between the Dorot division and maybe performing arts library. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and it's very important for me, and it's a priority for me. After having an initial program, which was a great success, to get this collection processed and to get this music performed. And I hope that there will be more concerts from this collection when we finish the processing. I can't really promise now because it's a process, but that was what people expressed interest in within the library, including within the library, and that's going to happen. And then another point, which I also think very important, that the whole highlight on this collection really prompted interest in maybe processing or additional processing of the Jewish music collections that are already at the New York Public Library. Digitizing some other collections which are no less important, maybe smaller in size. So it's great. It's a great feeling to be at the beginning of something really exciting and be part of it.
Do you think that this will lead eventually to increased or a look back at a refreshed look back at some of these Jewish composers like Olshenetsky and Sekunda, Rumshinsky, that there'll be new interest in their work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I already get a lot of emails about this collection in general, and absolutely. And this music is very beautiful. It's really, but these composers were real melodists of Jewish music. They really knew how to create a melody, how to make it appealing, and even from the music that was already performed at the program, you could hear that, and the public reacted spontaneously, very emotionally. I think music is something that connects the past of the Yiddish radio station with the present and with the future. And there are many musicians, young musicians, who want to perform this music.
Well, it's interesting that even though WEVD is no longer here, it lives on, and it produced this tremendous legacy for the Jewish community. A look at a very important period in American Jewish life, and to think about the radio station itself. And the call letters, EVD, were for Eugene V. Debs, who was the socialist leader in this country. And then over a period of years, Forward taking it over, and subsequent years with its programming, it really made an important impact on Jewish life, not just in New York, but around the country. So I think that we're all extremely fortunate that the collection wound up in your hands and in the hands of the New York Public Library, and it's quite an accomplishment, I think, for everybody.
Absolutely.
Well, the David and Ina Shiff WEVD Music Collection, part of the New York Public Library's Dorot Jewish Division, will be available to future musicians and scholars and public within the next 2 years. Dr. Sholokhova, thank you again for taking us through this treasure trove of Jewish music and the fortuitous journey that brought it into the library's care. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and we look forward to seeing the full WEVD collection sometime soon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here today.
Well, this wraps up another insightful episode of Conversations with B'nai B'rith. My thanks to Dr. Lyudmila Sholokhova for delving into the New York Public Library's new, remarkable David and Ina Shiff WEVD music collection and its entire Dorot Jewish division. And to you, our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode with others, post it on social media, or leave us a comment or a rating. For our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. We'll be back soon with more important discussions on the issues that matter most to the Jewish community and beyond. Until next time, for my guest, Dr. Lyudmila Sholokhova, this is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Take care, everyone.